start by introducing myself. I'm Allison. I am now the CEO and director of Foresight Institute, and we've been Foresight has existed since 1986, so longer than I've been around. And we've had this long-standing interest in many of the technologies that will be some of them that we'll be touching on. But in a nutshell, since an early time, what we've been focusing on is really trying to support beneficial technology development of high impact technology to make great futures more likely, and specifically the type of technologies and science that is perhaps too ambitious for legacy funders to support. And so we really try to create these kind of third spaces by which we can lift our gaze a little bit and think more about the potential long-term impact of technologies and how to realize better futures through technologies. And so we have a few focus areas that we operate in. One is intelligent cooperation, so that's cryptography, security, and AI. One is molecular machines, that's the vision that we were founded on in a book from Eric Drexler on molecular nanotechnology with big implications for space, if and when it works. Neurotechnology, and that's everything from brain-computer interfaces to whole brain emulations. We just had our workshops on that actually a few weeks ago. Longevity biotech, which I know many of you here are also interested in. And then finally, space. And so space is actually in our mission statement and has been a really, really long-term focus area of ours. And existential hope is the category by which we try to really make sure that these futures go well and go into hopeful directions. And the way that we do this is through seminars, so through our virtual seminars. I don't know how many of you here are already in our virtual space seminar group, but we're meeting about once a month, roughly. Many of you here have already presented. The seminar presentations and summaries and when videos were available are on the website. And that's mostly really to try to create a little bit of a, let's say long-term container through a Google group, which is invite and application-based, so that people can collaborate if they're not in the same space on the more physical space on the more long-term opportunities and space development. And then we also have prizes and fellowships in each of these different areas. And then we have, for example, many of our Foresight fellows are here, and those who really try to support a little bit more hands-on. And finally, we do in-person events. In each of these tracks that I showed you, we do in-person workshops. And this one, for example, is the one that you're here for today, the space workshop. And so to say perhaps a few words more about this, the goal is really that you all are in plenty of different conferences all the time, which is more about how can, you make immediate progress on specific opportunities in space. Danielle? Thank you. And I think what we're trying to do here is a little bit more really thinking more about the long-term implications, the type of stuff that is perhaps too weird to discuss at many of the conferences that you're at, but that many of you got interested in the space initially. And so really welcome you here to be a little bit more exploratory, be more adventurous, think a bit more term, and work on the type of things that you don't otherwise have a chance to talk about usually. And so we'll be really trying to create a container for that. And so we welcome you to really lean in on that. And for that, we have throughout the day mostly Chatham House rule whenever we talk amongst ourselves. The presentations at the beginning will be recorded, but everyone here who will be presenting has a veto or an editing right to whatever they're presenting on the record. And so really do keep each other accountable, think a little bit more long term, but also tell each other when you're oh, this is a bit outside of the laws of physics, at least in my perception. And then through Chatham House rule, that part hopefully won't leave this room. Okay, wonderful. So really welcoming you to think about undervalued opportunities, the type of stuff that doesn't otherwise get talked about. If you're interested in taking a look at the agenda and on all the other confirmed participants, they also have a link to their bio here on the main general workshop agenda, and the link to that is again here on the agenda. And to say a little bit more about how we're going about this, we already had the speaker and sponsor drinks yesterday. We're doing already did the introductions. Now we're on to workshop goals. And in a second from now, we'll be doing 3 spots of lightning presentations. And so we invited a few people up here to just lift our gaze a little bit and provide some food for thought. They're very short presentations, 7 minutes each. I am German, so I'll be very, very, very succinct on timekeeping. And I'll give you a little hint, and then 3 minutes Q&A. And this is mostly just to get a few ideas out there of what we could be discussing and working on and collaborating on afterwards. So we have a first slot of a few folks in the morning. Again, if you want to know when you're speaking, if you don't know when, the agenda is here via a link. Then we have lunch with mentorship pairings upstairs. Then we have a second round of very brief presentations, again with a Q&A session after each. Then we have another break. And then we have the final round of lightning presentations, again, just really trying to point out new areas that we may want to be working on. I should say in each of these presentations, I'll be standing here and I'll be asking you afterwards to produce a challenge if you're a speaker, that's something that you want others to work on throughout the rest of today. So we'll be collecting them all on the whiteboard. I'll be collecting them and then in the evening or in the afternoon sessions from 4:30 to 5:30, we'll be using them to form breakout groups that are a little bit more curated around what people here are actually interested in working on together, because there's so many different topics. Again, space is one specific vertical that we have, but even that vertical has so many different subtopics within it. So that's when we're trying to get a little bit more into focused working sessions. And that should be rather fun. I should also really note that if you're not a presenter, but if you have this one thing that hasn't been discussed all day that you really want people to work on, just write it on the whiteboard, and then we'll do little brief pitches onto what these topics are before we self-select into groups of common interest. We have a dinner afterwards with mentorship pairings and breakout drinks. And these breakout drinks, I'll say a little bit more about that as we go through the day, but they're really there to perhaps suggest a topic that is entirely irrelevant to workshop goals, but that you think people at this workshop have an interest in exploring. So they're very informal. And again, there'll be a whiteboard upstairs where you can mark your name. They will be entirely off the record, but if you have something that you think people here are interested in, mark it out here. One, for example, will be Will Marshall, who'll be joining later, who'll be doing one. I think we coaxed Adam into doing one already. So there's already a few of them, but we'll be collecting them on the whiteboard later. Then the second day, tomorrow morning, we'll be starting again with brief networking. Around 9:30, we'll be doing a specific session called a grieving and headache session, where you're able to put everything out there that is eating away at your inspiration for space in terms of regulatory challenges, social challenges, educational challenges. We're trying to give it all out there, bring it all out there in the morning session. And then we have technical working groups to really get deeper into project development around potential topics of common interest. I'll be saying more about that as we get there. And the idea is that with a headache session out of the way in the morning, you really have a bit more time to focus on the technical bits and pieces that need to be working, so you can forget about all the other headaches for now. Then we're doing lunch, and then we'll be doing brief working group presentations. And I'll say more about what that could look like when we get there. And then finally, we'll be doing next steps, and then a few after show drinks again afterwards. Again, I just wanted to point out really that, the presentations that we'll be starting with, will be on the record unless you afterwards tell us that you want specific things removed. So if you're showing some data that shouldn't be shown anywhere, nothing will get published before we check in with you guys. Okay, so just want to make sure that we can create a good container here, and we'll be saying a little bit more about what follow-on support will be available for projects past the workshop in case you want to take something on. Because I think we all know that after a workshop, everyone goes back into their individual silos. And even though there was an initial interest to work on something, it's very difficult to actually get that through. And so we're here to support you. And so anything that you can come up with, and there'll be prompts for that later, please do let us know. Okay, wonderful. I think if you walk away here, there's three potential low-hanging, middle-hanging, and high-hanging fruits that you may have picked afterwards. Lowest hanging fruits is, I think, just meeting a new collaborator, someone that you afterwards want to be working on the stuff that you're already working on. We try to get a little bit of that already out of the way by doing the introductory doc. Here you have it already. Many people have filled in their introductions already, so please feel free to take a look at that throughout the workshop. The second goal that you can have after getting out of here is actually having a new idea for something that you didn't know you want to work on before, or a new insight that will really help you move forward. And the highest hanging fruit is really finding collaborators to work on a project incubated at this workshop. And I'll say more about what that could look like once we get there. But I really want to encourage you to use this third space well, and try to pick the highest hanging fruit. And oftentimes that works relatively well after Foresight workshops, and we actually get some really interesting project proposals going. And so if you want to know more about this prior to me presenting a little bit more on that, please do let me know. But yeah, just wanted to encourage you to lift your gaze on this. Okay, wonderful. Well, then I think without further ado, in terms of just starting to lift our gaze a little bit before we start with the introductions, first of all, I should ask, do you have anything to add for this?
I don't have anything to add to your great outline. I would like to say 30 seconds of introducing our first speaker.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Before we get to that, I just wanted to kind of like lift our gaze a little bit. I'm not technical, but this is, I think, usually something that helps me think a little bit like more outside of the box in terms of long-term opportunities. And so I think it's interesting to think when we think about like, where are we and where could we be going in terms of this very, very kind of like sketchy graphic, but it's kind of like the quote is from Human Project, which is kind of like looking at like long-term futures in space. And it begins with asking, who are we? 13.7 billion years ago, we were crammed into a single point. 10 billion years ago, we were stars exploding into existence. 3 billion years ago, we were bacteria, we were alive. 1,000 years ago, we were all God's creations. 100 years ago, we had proved we were one species, descendant from the same evolutionary ancestors. 60 years ago, we declared we're all human, entitled to the same human rights. Today, we could tell a bigger story. We could create an identity that moves us and that takes us places. And then where could we be racing next? And I think if you look around, like one kind of scenario that looks very likely is this kind of extinction scenario. And I think this is like really well kind of like calibrated often with Friedrich Nietzsche. And he basically says about the future of humanity, in some remote corner of the universe, poured out and glittering in innumerable solar systems, there once was a star on which clever animals invented knowledge. That was the highest and most mendacious minute of world history, yet only a minute. After nature had drawn a few breaths, the star grew old and the clever animals had to die. There have been eternities when it did not exist, and when it's done for again, nothing will have happened. And I think if we look around, that's often kind of the sentiment that we think we're like racing towards. But I think we could be also racing to really wonderful, fantastic futures in space. And Eric Drexler, who co-founded Foresight, in the book that initiated Foresight, Engines of Creation, he lays out this other kind of potential. And he says, whether anyone else is out there or not, we are on our way. Expansion will proceed if we survive, because we're part of a living system and life tends to spread. Pioneers will move outward into worlds without end. Others will remain behind, building settled cultures throughout the oasis of space. Where goals change and complexity rules, limits need not bind us. New technologies will nurture new arts, and new arts will bring new standards. The world of brute matter offers room for great but limited growth. The world of mind and pattern, though, holds room for endless evolution and change. The possible seems room enough. And I think, we're really at this kind of like, a little bit of a precipice, one could say, into Riord's words, where we can, I think, really decide on the futures we want to create. And in 20 years, who knows, we could be Martians. And in 50 years, we could be like really, really further out. I think we're having a little bit more of the further out perspectives also starting us off with at the workshop. But I just really want to encourage us to think out of the box and to think a little bit more in these long-term trajectories that I think we all mostly know from sci-fi, but that many of you, I think, that many got you into the space in the first place. So, thanks a lot for coming, everyone. And I want to welcome Creon to welcome our first speaker on stage.